Well, welcome to Winter Renewal Week, everyone. It's gratifying to see such a large turnout. I don't know whether that's dependent on Divine Mothers helping us out with the snow. It really does help us to turn more inward when the snow comes. It's like a blanketing of the earth. If you look at the meadow out here during the summertime, you see thousands and thousands of little plants. They're like thoughts that distract the mind. And when the snow comes, it's more like meditation, where there's a blanket and a stillness and a uniformity. And so symbolically, winter has always been a time to turn more inward. And it's more than just because activity is harder. It's that there really is a rhythm to the year, just as there's a rhythm to the day. This morning, we're going to begin a series of 3 classes that fit together. And it really comes from a pair of pieces of advice that Swamiji gave to all of us a few years ago, and then another piece of advice that Swamiji gave to Devi and me about 2 or 2.5 years ago. The piece of advice that he gave to all of us, and this is very, very important, is that in this lifetime, we should all of us try to become Jivan Muktas. A Jivan Mukta represents a free soul. Jiva is Sanskrit for soul, and Mukta is free. So a free soul, that means a soul that has retreated from the delusion of having an ego. The ego, Master defined as the soul identified with a body and a personality, so that we can see that temporary state of having an ego. The soul is eternal. The ego is here for only a relatively short time in that eternity. But that period of time is a period of delusion or a period of hypnotism, when we've become hypnotized into thinking that we're something different from what we are. Hypnotism almost always shrinks down the perception, the field of perception. And so the great hypnotism of Maya, or delusion, which is universally produced by God in order to manifest a creation, it's there, and we're a part of that. And as long as we identify with our separate nature, we will become caught in that web that God has created. Master said he used to argue with God. You made this delusion, you have to get me out of it. It's your fault, so help me out here. And so it is that we have this apparent battle to overcome. Now, Master also said that when no saint, when he has become self-realized, has said to God, basically, you shouldn't have done that, or you did a bad job. It's that kind of game of hide and seek, and the hidden part of it, the seeking part of it, becomes, as Master said, like an anguishing monotony. And so that desire arises in us to re-experience the true nature of who we are. We always are, always will be the soul. We always will have a self-identity. It's not that we're going to cease to have a sense of I-ness. I-ness is not the ego. I-ness is a sense of self that is inherent in God and in creation. So that is not going to go away. What is going to go away is the limitation of that sense of I-ness. Master used the analogy of the ocean and the wave. The wave, if it did not perceive that it was part of the ocean, that it was only the wave, has the identity of itself as the wave. We have the identity of ourself as the ego. But that wave is also part of the incredible vastness of all the world, of all creation. In this sense, in the analogy, the wave is a part of the whole of the ocean. We are part of the wave of the ocean of consciousness that creates everything. So, the first charge that we have is to become Jivan Muktas, to awaken to our true reality, or, as Master said, to achieve a state of self-realization. He said self-realization is the knowing in all parts of body, mind, and soul that you are now in possession of the kingdom of God, and that you need not seek it anywhere, but just improve your knowing. So that sense of the self as part of everything, or as the creator, is what we're after. Now, we probably all have heard that. We certainly, if we're gathered here in this temple today, know that we're on a spiritual search, and that the goal of that spiritual search is the state of self-realization. But there's another aspect to it, and that's the apparent path that we have to travel. Because whether we can say that it's reality or non-reality, whether it's hypnotism or a period of Maya, the fact of the matter is that in our present state of consciousness, we do perceive ourselves as separate. We do perceive ourselves as limited. We perceive basically the body as ending at where our skin ends. We perceive our consciousness, our self. Most people perceive the self as having a very limited period of time, from the time that they were born until the time where they are at this very moment. So that most people don't have the perception of reincarnation. Krishna said to Arjuna, the difference between us, O Arjuna, is that you do not remember your past lives, whereas I remember them all. And so most people, there's part of the vast game of hide and seek that God plays with us, is that he has a kind of disconnect, a non-memory of our past lives. And so we come into this life, we may have some glimmerings, some vague kind of memories, but virtually no one comes in with clear memory of all of our past lives. And without that, it takes us a longer time to get out of delusion. Master said the reason that we don't remember our past lives is that God made it so that we couldn't, because if we did, we'd get out too quickly. The sense of anguishing monotony, it's enough to remember, however old you are, if you're 50, to remember a sense of anguishing monotony for the last 50 years. Imagine remembering for the last 50 million years. It would seem like maybe I'm going at this a little bit wrong. Maybe there really is something that I ought to be doing differently. Okay, so given the fact that we want to get into a state of self-realization, then the obvious question is, how do we do that? And that brings me to the second part of the charge from Swamiji. Devi and I, many of you have heard this story, but it's very, very well worth repeating, because it really has set the theme, the tone for this week. 2 or 3 years ago, we were with Swamiji in Gurgaon, and we were at breakfast, and he was eating his breakfast, and we were chatting about this and that, generally speaking, not about anything very deep or very pertinent. But at one point, we said to him basically, Swami, we've been at this for a long time now, 35, 40 years. How do we really achieve self-realization? And he stopped, and in that moment, he just put down his fork, and he looked right at us, And he said the whole of the spiritual path is to overcome the ego, or to banish the ego. The way to do that is by deeper and longer meditation, and by seeing God as the doer in all things. I'll repeat that because it's the summation of the spiritual path right there. The whole of the spiritual path is to dissolve the ego. The way to do that is by deeper and longer meditation, and by seeing God as the doer in all things. And so this week we're going to talk about that in more depth. This morning I'm going to talk mainly about deeper and longer meditations. Tomorrow we're going to talk about seeing God as the doer in everything. And on Wednesday we're going to talk about the guru-disciple relationship. Implied in that formula that Swami gave us is the discipleship relationship that we have with the guru. Because without the guru's help, we cannot achieve this. The guru is the free soul sent into this miasma of delusion, who has the ability to perceive in ways that we do not have the ability to perceive, and is therefore able to help us out of delusion. One time Swami was looking at Master and gazing at him with a great love and a great sense of appreciation for who Master was and what he had given to Swamiji, and by extension to all of us. And Master looked at him very deeply and said, "If you only knew my consciousness." Now, to give a little inkling of that, I was reading yesterday Master talking about consciousness. He said that, first of all, the typical human has about has about 1,000 thoughts every hour. That makes about 3.5 seconds between thoughts. And so the mind is constantly creating thoughts. Said the conscious mind doesn't remember very much of that process. The subconscious mind remembers all of it. So that somewhere in the subconscious mind is locked the memory at some level of everything that you have perceived, everything that you've felt, everything that you've seen, heard, done, and so on. And all of that is there. The superconsciousness remembers not only your own thoughts, but the thoughts of everyone else on the planet at the same time. And so that's the state of a master. If you only knew my consciousness, think of the trillions and trillions and trillions of thoughts that are going on at any one time on this planet. A master is aware of all of them. Why is he aware of all of them? Because he has no longer limited his thought of self to one body and one personality. Rather, he has expanded his sense of self to be God the Creator, who is in everything and is everyone. I remember one time I was having a discussion with our son, who was about 7 at the time, and I was explaining something about this kind of concept that God is in everything, and that God knows everyone's thoughts all the time. And he said, "You mean that God knows even on the other side of the world if a little ant goes into the hole?" I said, "Yes, if he just thinks about it, he would know that." And my son thought for a second or so. I said, "He wouldn't have to think about it. He is that ant." Which is, in fact, the truth. When you are everything, it's not like you have to... See, we have the concept of how hard it would be to think about all these trillions of thoughts. because we are separate from all those trillions of thoughts. When you are everything, it's just natural, it's just normal. And that's why Master could say, if you only knew my state of consciousness. Well, his consciousness is far beyond that. It's into the infinity. So it's not limited to just this world. Okay, set that aside. We have a little ways to go. At least in perception, we have a little ways to go to get to that kind of consciousness. But as Master said to Swami said, when he had played Christ in a tableau, he said, I'd rather be like Christ than look like Christ. Master said very matter-of-factly, that will come. That Christ consciousness that is that knowing of everything, that expanded sense that you are everything, that will come, and that's what we're after. Okay, so then the question comes, how do we get there? Well, by deeper, longer meditation, and by seeing God as the doer in everything. So I want to talk this morning a little bit about the deeper, longer meditation part of it. Meditation, to a certain extent, is a little bit of a slippery concept because we use the term in two ways. We use the term to, what it really should mean in our mind is the state of consciousness when we are in a state of meditation. But we also use it to talk about the process of meditation, which is the process of getting to that state of consciousness. Okay, so what is the state of consciousness of true meditation? Well, it really begins with in Sanskrit, what Patanjali talked about in his Eightfold Path. It really begins with the state of dharana. Dharana means complete, total concentration without any restless thoughts on one point. And that point, there aren't many points where you can hold your consciousness on, many different things that you can hold your consciousness one-pointedly on, because those things have to be a direct expression of God. So for all practical purposes, there are less than a dozen, and for us, really, there are only about 5 things that we will hold our mind on in a point of complete concentration. Everything else is not that state of consciousness. It's attempting to get there. So what can we hold our minds on that in a practical way? Light, sound, energy or the flow of energy, which is what we practice in Kriya and our other techniques, but also not just the flow of energy, but also the focus of energy, a focal point of energy, joy and devotion or love. There are others also that are extensions of God, but by and large, we don't normally meditate on calmness, say. So I'm going to kind of limit it to those 5. So if we can get to the state of dharana, it means that we're in the state of perceiving one of those 5 things, and there's no other restlessness in the mind. None. No thoughts. In the deepest part of dharana, or as we progress through the next couple of points of Patanjali, is after dharana, after we can hold our mind one-pointedly on one thing with deep concentration, and Master defined meditation as meditation is the deep concentration on God, one of His qualities, or one of His holy prophets. So that deep concentration, that's meditation. When we can hold that state of concentration for a long enough time, then the sense that we are, for instance, looking at the light, that we're looking at the light disappears, and all we're perceiving is light. There isn't any me looking and light there. That difference, we become absorbed in the light. And then when we can perceive in realization, not just mentation, but true realization, that everything is made of energy, everything is made of light. Why stop at the physical boundary of my body? If I'm light everywhere in the universe. And that's, we expand out into samadhi. So dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, Patanjali called that samyama. I'm not going to take the time to write it, I'll just say it.
You want me to do?
Yeah, samyama. And so if we were really working with proper definitions, we wouldn't say I'm meditating unless we were in the state of samyama. We would say I'm practicing my techniques of meditation, trying to get to that state. Now, why do I want to emphasize that so much? Because a lot of our time in meditation is spent relatively wasted. And we need to keep clearly in our mind what the goal of our meditation is. This class is, being presented primarily to members of the village. And for those people are going to also watch it on the internet where we're going to post it. So for those of you who are watching on the internet, there are about 200 people gathered here, 150 or 200 people gathered here, and primarily members of the community, residents of Ananda village, and then we have a few dear friends who are visiting us from around the country and around the world. But everyone here is a serious devotee. Everyone here has dedicated themselves to these spiritual practices. So we're not talking here to a group of beginners. So I want to talk about all of us and how we deepen our meditations. How do we get to this deeper point of dharana, so that we really are focused one-pointedly? Because in a very realistic way, the enemy of our deeper meditation is simply restless thoughts. Now, when you hear Master talking about the fact that we have 1,000 thoughts an hour, and that 1,000 thoughts an hour continues throughout all of our waking period, and the brain doesn't shut down at night either. It's active. Some parts of the brain are more active at night than during the day. It's little wonder that there's kind of a momentum built up for the mind to have thoughts and to be restless. And so that becomes the primary obstacle. The restless thoughts, the restlessness of the mind, that is the primary obstacle that we have in meditation, in that aspect of our spiritual life. So how do we overcome that? First of all, we cannot overcome it. You cannot get over thinking by more thinking. If you think you can think your way out of it, you're a goner before you start. As Master, well, it is Master, but as Arjuna said to Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, he said, "My mind keeps running away from me. My mind is more difficult to tame than the wind." And Krishna, or Master in his interpretation, said that is an expression of the thought that the mind is more difficult to control than is the breath. So Master has come and given us 3 techniques particularly that are going to help us overcome the restlessness of the mind. And I want to talk about the practice of those techniques. The first we do before we sit to meditate normally, and that's energization. For those of you who are not doing energization, you need to understand deeply that they are not physical exercises. They are exercises that lead to the control over the restlessness of the mind. Because we cannot control the mind with the mind, we must control the mind with the control of energy, with pranayama. And the energization exercises are meant to give us a daily practice of sending and withdrawing energy. And they're the foundation of the spiritual path for us. Master said that if you were banished to a desert island and you had only one thing that you could take with you, take the energization exercises, because through them the entire path of yoga would be rediscovered. And so the practice, the daily practice of the energization exercises sets a foundation. It sets a foundation of gradually training the mind to send and control energy. A second thing that it does, and this is very, very important, is it teaches us to stop and feel the energy. Meditation is more feeling or more listening than it is activation, like prayer. So Swami has said meditation is listening, but it's listening, feeling, it's that receptivity. So it trains us to send energy, it trains us to feel the effect of energy having been sent, and finally, and probably most importantly, it attunes us to the Master. He's only given us 3 or 4 things to do, for goodness sake. And if we don't do even those, where are we? In fact, another thing he said is that when disciples came to him, in fact, I wrote it down because I wanted to read it specifically. He said, all those who come to me for training, I place in certain situations to see how their minds and feelings will react. If they respond adversely, I try to correct them. But I don't do this unless the person has asked to be corrected and has given me the authority and permission to guide him. So he places us in adverse situations, such as telling us to do the energization exercises every day. And then he waits to see how we react. And if we do it, then he gives us the next part of the puzzle. And if we don't, then he says, well, I'll just wait till people are willing, till that person is willing to take the advice that I give them. Okay, so energization. Now, why is energization as important as it is? Because the way to mind control is through energy control. You cannot get there by restlessness. You cannot get there by thinking. You have to get there by control of the energy. Now, preceding this target that Devi has drawn, which is where we're trying to get, preceding that, the 3 steps before that are asana, which means to hold the body still, pranayama, which means to control the energy flow, and pratyahara, which means that when the energy flow is internalized, the senses begin to shut down or become shut down. Master called it the shutting off of the sense telephones. That is the stage from asana to the shutting down of the sense telephones. That is the active practice that we're engaged in meditation or in our meditative spiritual life. So let me describe it so that the illustration came that helps us get a handle on this, and that's to describe it in terms of location. So if we're trying to get to the point of deep meditation, which is this samyama, or at least the starting point of it at dharana, we're trying to get there. Let that, for now, represent the temple here. So imagine that where we're trying to get to is the temple, and we're trying to be still and in a state of concentration there. How do we get there? Well, we have to go along a path. If we're not in that state, if we're not in the state of samyama. So imagine that we're taking a path from, let's call it Ayodhya, which is about a mile. Now there's a straight way that we can walk from Ayodhya to here without any deviation. And if you do that, it probably takes you about 15 minutes or something like that. So you can do that relatively easily. Most meditations, that straight path is the practice of the techniques that Master has given us. It's the practice of Hong Sa, which is specifically meant to internalize the prana into the subtle spine. Hong Sa is a bija mantra that allows us to calm down the energy flow and internalize it. It's the practice of Kriya, and it's the practice of those techniques. It can also be the practice of chanting, as long as chanting is very, very focused. But those simple techniques are the straight path. If we were to really do that each day, our meditations would quickly and automatically become better if we really practice that. But what we do is we start out at Ayodhya, and we get about, some of us don't even get to Sages Road, let's face it. Which, for those who don't know, is about 20 feet from where we start out of the mile. So we start out, and all of a sudden we think, what was I going to have for breakfast? Do I have it? I think I'll head back, check my refrigerator, because mentally we're spinning out and checking our refrigerator, or checking, and gradually we get finally done with that little series of thoughts. We get to Sages Road and we think, I wonder what projects I've got this morning, and on and on and on. So we keep going off on these loops, these loops. Now some of those loops kind of come out and bend around and get us more or less in the right direction. Nice thoughts, kind thoughts, thinking of others, maybe even praying for others. They loop out. They aren't direct, but at least they head in the right direction. Most of them don't even head in the right direction. They just take us off. So the first thing that we have to understand is that as soon as we find the mind wandering, we have to bring it back. If we do not develop that skill, we will not be able to meditate deeply. It's as simple as that. So develop the skill. Master gave it to us specifically in the Hong Sa technique. That's why it is such a good technique. That there you have a single point of focus. You have the breath, and you have the energy field at the point between the eyebrows, where you try to feel the breath closer and closer to that point. The practice of the Hong Sa technique specifically says, as soon as you have found your mind wandering, bring it back to that technique. That is the essence of the straight path into dharana or samyama. As soon as you find your mind wandering, bring it back to the practice of the technique, or the practice of focusing on one of those 5 things that I mentioned: light or sound or energy or joy or devotion, perceiving Master, or a relationship with him. Everything else is a bypath. And some are not bypaths, they're anti-paths. So now it should be very clear in our meditation at least how we get there. Now We can't always control the mind. As I said, the mind is by its nature restless. So we can't always control it. But let's at least understand very clearly that meditation is not thinking. Meditation is not even thinking good thoughts. Meditation is deep concentration, and that we have to get there by the practice of concentration. Now, what happens as we concentrate, and more specifically as we do Hong Sa or as we do Kriya, is that because we can't control the mind, it's more difficult to control than the wind. And the wind means breath. Master says, then control the breath. So Hong Sa controls the breath, Kriya controls the breath. So basically, you will not get into a state of deep meditation without controlling the breath, either through Hong Sa or through Kriya. So, to put it simply, everything else you're doing in meditation until you're in this state is a waste of time. So that gives us a pretty clear, pretty clean slate, pretty clean agenda to at least be able to evaluate when we're meditating, whether we're meditating in such a way that it is likely to lead us to this point or that it's likely not to. And so it's very, very important that we begin meditation with a deep intention to get there. Now, what does it mean, practically speaking, to do this? I'm not going to go over the practice of Hong Sa or of Kriya or of any of that. We all know those techniques. What is the inward sense of it? The inward sense of it is that when the mind wanders at all, and the sooner you can catch it, the better. When it wanders at all, bring it back immediately to the practice and the focus on what you're doing, because the wandering mind is the enemy of meditation, and it's the primary enemy, it's the primary foe that we have to work with. So as soon as the foe begins to draw you out into a trap, cut it off, come back into yourself and focus on the technique. The technique of Hong Sa should be done with the intention that you want to go breathless. And so you can feel that as you do it. You can feel that as you get deeper and deeper into the practice of it, that the breath is becoming calmer and calmer. Don't think that just a little bit of calmness will do it. Really have the intention that you're going to get so focused, so internalized, and so withdrawn and one-pointed that you will no longer need the breath. Doesn't mean we're going to get there, but the intention to get there is extremely important, because that will add power to your meditations. If your intention when you sit to meditate is to get into this state, and you know what the techniques are that will get you there in a straight line, then the practice of those techniques and the practice of them in a very, very internalized way is what will lead you to deeper meditation. And longer is just to do that for a longer period of time. So those are the two things that Swamiji told us specifically about meditation to do, and that we share. Deeper and longer meditations. Practice of Kriya obviously does the same thing in an even more powerful way. The practice of Kriya is not, however, samyama. The practice of Kriya is the technique of the most effective technique to get us into that state. So when we practice Kriya, the most important point of Kriya is the deep, inward, calm, focused state that is after Kriya. And so it's extremely important that you go as deep into one of those 5 things that I was talking about, light, sound, so on, as deeply as you can after you finish your Kriya, and you hold that for as long as you can. If you can do that, then you rest in a state that will actually change your consciousness and make meditation easier and easier. If we don't do that, we basically give in to the restless momentum of the mind, and at some point we just have to come back and fight that battle of deep inward concentration. And when we do fight that battle with all the ability and intention and energy that we have, then God and Guru will help us.